Hi, my name is Sophie Little, and my project was Drought Tolerance in Setaria viridis and its application to worldwide crops. In this project, I found that there is a drought tolerance in a mutant line of Setaria viridis, which is a model crop for staples such as rice and corn. Not only is this very exciting, but it is also very important. As drought is one of the leading causes of crop losses in our world today, even over flooding, insects, and other things like that. There's very few ways to mitigate this problem, even looking at crop irrigation. Because when you look at places like Colorado or Texas or even like South Africa, there's already a low abundance of water in that. So you can't really do crop irrigation in that. Also, when you look at crop insurance for like the actual farmers, it can often it's not comprehensible, and they don't get paid for their crop losses. So that wouldn't really work either. And like, even when you look at, it's not just the crops that the drought affects. When a crop fails and it is being grown for livestock, such as maybe it's like corn or alfalfa or something like that, and you're growing it for your livestock, then you lose that and you lose one of your food for your livestock, and you don't have the fresh food that you want to give to your livestock. So that also largely affects the livestock and the crop production. So drought is a very, very large problem. But if you did have a plant that you could use and it was drought tolerant, then it could be grown in areas where most of the time it's actually not, because of it is like a drought area. And then that would give lands that are heavily used a rest, which would also help further in agriculture, and it would give the land, it would give the land rest, so that it would have time to rebuild the nutrients so that it could be farmed again later. It would also make the areas where there is drought and then they're growing this plant, it would also make them more independent, and that they wouldn't have to rely on others to deliver their food to that area. It can also just like help the agriculture be more widely spread instead of in a few concentrated areas. So when I was looking at the spindly mutant, I saw that it looked as though it had a shade avoidance that was continually triggered. So I thought maybe this can help with putting the mutant under stressful environments, and then it could do better than the wild type in those environments. And so one of the things came to mind was drought. And so when testing the drought, we took mutants and wild types, and they were put. A group was in 70% water capacity, and then another group was in 20% water capacity. 70% being like the normal amount of water that a crop would have, and then 20% being considered drought. And in all other ways, the plants were the exact same. We had our control group and we had our drought testing group, and all of the things were the same except for their water capacity. And in those, we measured the panicles, panicle production, the viable seeds and the seed production, and then the height of them. And then, so since we thought it was a shade avoidance response that was being triggered, we decided to make sure, to be sure that that's what it was. And if it was, then it would be a problem with converting PR into PFR. So it would be having a problem with sensing red light and far red light. So we took the mutant and the wild type, and we put them under full spectrum lights, one which was supplemented with far red light and the other which was supplemented with red light, to see if it was actually a shade avoidance response problem. And then when looking at our actual results here, We saw that in comparing the drought study to the control in looking at the mutant, there was a very minor difference in that. So that showed high statistical that it was actually drought tolerant, which is really good. That's what that we wanted. And then when we looked at the height, the difference in the height, looking at that, in the wild type, there was a decrease by 38% in their height. So the drought study were much shorter and smaller than the control. And then looking at the mutant, there was a very minor difference. So they were basically the same in their height. But then when looking at the panicles, the mutant had a 27% increase in their panicle production. But the wild type had a 100% decrease. So they had no panicles at all compared to the control. And then when we looked at the seed production, the wild types had a negative 81% decrease. So they had 81% less seeds in the drought study. And then when we looked at the mutants, they had a 1,200% increase in their seed production. They had so much more than they had in the control. So they were doing way better in the drought than they were in the actual control. And then when we looked at this statistical analysis of them, there was a very minor statistical difference in the mutant plants, but in the wild type plants, there was a huge statistical difference. So that indicates with a high statistical degree of certainty that these plants were actually drought tolerant. And this can be applied to agriculture today, in that when we study this, we're studying a model for the staples, so that can help with our making our staples able to be drought tolerant. Also, you could take another mutant of Setaria viridis and cross it with this one, and if we crossed a overly full panicle with this one, then that could increase the seed production and panicle production by a lot. And so then we could have a higher production rate with also drought tolerance, which would be very, very good. So in conclusion, this project is very important for agriculture today in helping areas with drought problems to still be able to produce crops and food, and even this could be taken even farther into even further helping crops in agriculture today.